All right. Hello and welcome back to the Blitz Banter podcast, episode 3. And we got a lot to talk about today, guys. We are 1 week into the 2024 NFL season. A lot of games to break down, a couple of headlines to touch on in the beginning. And then we're going to wrap up the show with fantasy talk, some waiver wire pickups for your fantasy teams, who you should be picking up, who you could end up dropping from your bench or from your team this year. Well, let's get right into the headlines. We got 3 to talk about today. We're going to talk about Dak Prescott and the extension he got just maybe an hour right before, maybe less, right before the season kicked off for the Dallas Cowboys and Cleveland Browns. Then we got 2 injuries to touch on. Puka Nacua, who landed on the IR and left the Lions and Rams Sunday night game. And then finally, Monday night, Christian McCaffrey being ruled out before kickoff with a calf Achilles injury. First, starting with the extension, so the good before the bad. Dak Prescott getting a, I guess, well-earned, well-deserved extension. We know what he does in the playoffs, but he's the franchise quarterback for the Cowboys, and Jerry Jones had to pay him eventually. We were talking about a couple episodes ago, it might have been the last one, about how many free agents the Cowboys need to pay after the season. Well, they finally extended their quarterback 4 years, $240 million, and the deal includes a $231 million guaranteed and $80 million signing bonus. So we're going to get right into that first. Mark, Hunter, if you guys want to give your comments or just takeaways or feedback from the big signing for the Cowboys.
I guess I'll start it off. I think this deal definitely needed to be done. I've seen a lot of arguments from Stephen A. Smith, on First Take of NFL on ESPN, talking about how, it's not the craziest thing in the world that the Cowboys are looking at other options. And, what I say to that is that, yeah, Dak might not be the playoff performer that you hope he should or can be, but I also think that Dak Prescott is the best chance for the Cowboys to A, make the playoffs, and B, actually make a Super Bowl run, even though, like I said, he's not a playoff performer. And I say that because I just think Dak fits well in the system of the Dallas Cowboys. He makes that connection with CeeDee Lamb game in and game out. He's able to even find other open guys on the field like Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks. Do I think that the Dallas Cowboys are actually going to win a Super Bowl? Not really. So ultimately, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. But, when you look at the quarterback situation in the NFL, if you were to let go Dak Prescott, you kind of got to think of who's going to go for him immediately. And I think a lot of teams definitely come to mind. Like many teams in the NFL definitely need a quarterback right now. So it was definitely vital for them to get this deal done. Do I think they needed to pay him $60 million a year and make him the number one most paid player in the NFL? I don't think so, but that's the marketplace in the NFL. And, I guess you got to do what you got to do.
This offseason, all eyes have really been on the Cowboys for 3 reasons. 1 being Micah, 2 being CeeDee, and 3 being Dak. And we really don't think all 3 of them could be paid because they all deserve to be paid a high amount. I don't know about the top in the league at each position, especially for Dak. CeeDee got paid last week. Dak got paid yesterday or 2 days ago now. Yeah. And now it's going to happen with Micah. He's probably the best of those 3 in terms of as an overall football player. So you have that. I think Dak kind of deserves that money. I don't think he should be the highest paid overall QB, but like Mark said, that's where the market is right now. No one's going to accept the deal unless they're the highest paid. If you're actually someone in the conversation, it really comes down to the playoff performance for me as to why I don't think that. Year in, year out, he's one of the best QBs in the league for the regular season. But what does he have? 4 playoff wins, something like that. And in 2, yeah, 2 in 8 seasons. That's atrocious. That's all.
I think he's 2-8 or something like that.
Yeah,
2-7, whatever it is.
I think it's 2-8. Yeah, that's a big issue. And yeah, that's my main reason why I'd say Dak should have gotten a little less money, but I just don't think a deal would have been done if he didn't get this money.
Moving on to an injury that occurred on Sunday night, in arguably one of my favorite games, and we're going to get into all the games of the week, and that was the Lions and the Rams. Puka Nacua landing on the IR with a knee injury, so he will miss at least the next 4 games, maybe even 5, at least 5, because when he comes off the IR, they'll go on to their bye week. So they're going to be without Puka Nacua for 5 weeks.
He's not playing until week 7.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's a tough loss for the LA Rams.
It's crazy.
They're going to be heavily relying on Cooper Kupp. Had a great game, for the Rams, I mean, that game went to overtime. I think they still played very well. Playing in Detroit against the Lions is very tough. 14 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown for Kupp. I expect that production to stay around the same 30 fantasy points for him, or maybe even increase now with Puka out. So I'll let you guys touch on the injury and just how it impacts the Rams offense.
Yeah, so starting off with Puka Nacua, when I first started watching the game, it almost looked like that, I could be wrong, but like the first 5 targets of the game all went to Cooper Kupp. Like it was just he runs 5 yards up, does a little slant, and he gets the ball. And, Puka's like not even getting targeted. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, this guy just broke the rookie receiving record. Like, why is he being ignored? And I'm not saying Cooper Kupp isn't good, because he is very good in his own right. I mean, just back in, what was it, 2021, 2022, he had 1,948 receiving yards. Like, that is also insane. I'm not ignoring that. If you even want to call him a wide receiver 2, you could even call him a wide receiver 1 that had as many yards as he did in his first season. And I mean, like, he's basically the only reason besides Kyren Williams why they even made the playoffs in the first place. Like, you got to get him the ball. So then they started targeting him. I think he had around 4 targets when he exited the game, which is good. I think it's around the same as Cooper Kupp had. I think Cooper Kupp probably had like 6 targets and Puka had 4. So it's good to see that the Rams are actually spreading the ball a little bit. Man, I think it's a massive blow for the Rams because, I mean, if you have 2 wide receivers of that caliber that are capable of just taking control of the game and are capable of easily being a wide receiver 1 on any offense in the league besides like a few, I think it's gonna be a big blow for the Rams. I think it's gonna be easy for defenses to figure out who they need to cover because this wide receiver room is not very deep. Like if you look at the Packers versus the Rams, like Cooper Kupp is like way up here, and then every other receiver is like kind of down here. Versus the Packers, like it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, like they're all in this like very high tier. So, yeah, I think this is really going to hurt the Rams' chances of possibly making the playoffs this year.
I'll speak more on, I guess, Rams, Lions, the game itself later in the podcast, as I have plenty to talk about, including number 9 on the Lions. Anyways, yeah. So let's go back the years here. All right, 2021, they win the Super Bowl. 2022, Rams go 5-12. It is the worst record for like a reigning champion in any sport, like almost ever. Like I was like probably like I think like the second worst, like coming off of like a Super Bowl hangover. Last season, I expected them to do even worse. I actually covered the Rams at Sports Illustrated for a few months. It's one of the teams that I worked with, not with, but just wrote about. And I saw that they were like raving about this guy named Puka Nacua, and I just assumed like during training camp, and I just assumed that's whatever. It's just that your typical media stuffs and like coaches saying, "Oh, this player's gonna be great. This player's gonna be great," and meanwhile they're a 5th-round pick and they're probably not gonna get any snaps. But boy, was I wrong. Puka Nacua obviously set multiple records on practically a weekly basis, and he's a huge reason why they made the playoffs last season. Because I thought they'd be even worse than 5-12. I thought they'd go like 4-13 or 3-14 or something like that. But what was I wrong? Now, last night, like Mark said, Kupp had like 4 receptions on the first drive, which was ridiculous. And Puka wasn't really looked at as much. He was a little later in the game, but then he got hurt. Now, this game plan worked with just throwing to Kupp the entire rest of the game. I don't know if that's going to work for the rest of the season, not the rest of the season, but while Puka's on IR. Like I don't see that happening. They played against the Lions, who are like one of the best teams in the league, so it did work out, but the Lions didn't game plan to have Puka Nacua not in the lineup and just Cooper Kupp. Now that that is the case, I think teams will really more focus on Cooper Kupp. I don't think he's going to play like his 2021 self, where he won Offensive Player of the Year and Super Bowl MVP. but he's someone to watch for. So that's pretty much it. It's a shame Puka won't be playing till week 7, but the Rams could really use him.
Yeah, absolutely. Puka Nacua had such an impact and was one of the obviously surprise rookies of last year. And everybody keeps saying who's going to be the next Puka Nacua. And that term doesn't really get thrown around a lot unless you really made an impact on not just the team, but the game a lot. So I agree with both of your points. Like losing someone like him is going to hurt them and hurt that offense. But if Kupp can stay healthy and do obviously what he did on Sunday night and continue to do what he's done throughout his professional career. Again, Hunter mentioned it, but the 2021 season when they went to the Super Bowl, he was tremendous that year. I don't remember. He had like MVP or something, right? Offensive Player of the Year.
He won Offensive Player of the Year and Super Bowl
right.
MVP. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was amazing that year. And if the Rams want to make the playoffs or make a playoff push and not having their wide receiver too, really like a 1A, 1B situation for a good number of weeks, they really need to rely on him. And I think the running game a lot as well in Kyren Williams and maybe get Blake Corum involved in the receiving game or the rushing game. Moving on to the last headline we're going to touch on before we get more into the games of this week. Christian McCaffrey, obviously San Francisco 49ers star running back, rolled out before kickoff. Questionable all week with the calf Achilles injury, but was rolled out maybe, I mean, for me, it seemed like it was about 40 minutes to an hour before kickoff. So obviously a tough loss for the 49ers, but really didn't seem to matter because Jordan Mason stepped up. He sat on my bench last night. And I think he sat on a lot of people's benches and maybe in some leagues sat on the waiver wire and won't much longer. But just to look at his stats, 28 carries, 147 yards, and a touchdown. He said in the post-game interview that he knew he was going to be starting as early as Friday night. For some fantasy owners, I wish they knew, like myself, that he would be starting Friday night. But regardless, Kyle Shanahan, just such a creative mind, always finds ways to win the game with the weapons that he has. I think their defense was tremendous. I mean, we're looking at a Jets team that you didn't really know what you were getting on the first game. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers, a 40-year-old quarterback coming off the Achilles tear, played more snaps now. He completed his first game as a Jet, so that's something to definitely celebrate. And I wouldn't be panicking if I'm the Jets, but definitely finding a way to beat them without your star running back, the consensus #1 overall pick in fantasy, is not something easy to do. But they spread the ball well. Jordan Mason stepping up was huge for them. And I have him, so I'll say, I know we're going to touch on fantasy later in the show, but Jake Moody, my fantasy kicker, getting me 26 points last night to win.
Jeez.
Yeah, very huge. But hopefully McCaffrey is back sooner than later, and we'll see him on the field because when healthy, he is just so fun to watch, as you guys know. But your guys' thoughts on McCaffrey and really how much he means to this offense and whether or not this will be more of a serious injury going forward that we need to evaluate, or whether or not this will be something that is just a week 1, we're going to rest him and we'll see him next week.
Yeah, so I can touch on the McCaffrey situation. As for his actual injury, I don't really know much about it. I guess it's hard to know whether or not this is going to be like a long-term injury. It doesn't really seem like it will stick. I think he'll be back next week, hopefully. And if not next week, I think he'll be back in week 3. Because if he was seriously injured, I think we would have seen it in training camp already, and like they would have already put him on the IR had it been a serious injury. Now, for his actual impact on the game, I think this is everything for the 49ers. I think, they played against the New York Jets last night, and I think the Jets could have easily beaten the 49ers, but I just think their game plan just wasn't good enough, and it just wasn't that good. They really only spread the ball to like 3 people on the entire team. I guess for the 49ers defense, it was not hard. It was easy to figure out what the game plan was going to be. Now, as for what this means for the 49ers offense, I don't think Jordan Mason is going to continue to do exactly what he did last night. I think personally that, this was kind of a one-off. Although he had a very good rushing production, he didn't really get too involved in the receiving aspect of the game. And so when you look at Christian McCaffrey, how he's basically able to play wide receiver along with being the number one running back in the league, like that's gonna affect you at some point. I mean, you look they're starting to use like Deebo Samuel as a running back. I think that just kind of puts him more at risk for injury. And so, if he happens to go down, now you only have Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle, and what Deebo Samuel means to the offense along with Christian McCaffrey. I mean, these are all guys that you need on the field at all times. And I think had Christian McCaffrey been on the field playing like at 100%, I think the score would have been a lot more than it was last night.
Yeah. It's a little tough to judge for me. So Christian McCaffrey is obviously the best like offensive player in the league that's not a quarterback, and there's really no debating that. The only guy that you might be able to put up in the conversation is Tyreek Hill, but that's it. There's no one else. Last night they're going against the Jets defense that's supposed to be top three in the league across the board, defensive line, linebackers, and DBs, and that was not the case. Like when you see the Niners offense without McCaffrey, you still have an above average QB in Brock Purdy. And then you have Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle, who are all Pro Bowl caliber players. If anything, a couple of them could be all pros, but that's for another conversation. They don't necessarily need him to succeed, but he generally puts them above the pedestal and makes them a Super Bowl caliber team like last year. And really the year before, but they lost in the NFC Championship due to injuries to him, including him. But Jordan Mason last night, he pretty much scored the same amount of points that McCaffrey would have scored. Do I think that's going to happen always, like until McCaffrey's back, which I think it'll be either next week or the week after? I don't think he'll do the same production, but at the same time, it was against the Jets defense that is supposed to be top three in the league. Like they're not going to go against really any other better defenses for the rest of the season, because the Niners themselves are probably a top three defense, or they're up there at least. So it's hard for me to judge this whole McCaffrey injury thing. But the Niners, without him, they went 3-and-out on the first drive, and then they scored on the next 8. Like, that's crazy. That's insane against the defense that's supposed to be this good. So I don't think they'll replicate that same production the next week or two without McCaffrey, because teams will be able to adjust. But I trust that they'll still go 2-0 or 3-0. I don't know who their next game is at offhand, but I'd be willing to bet they're probably going to win it.
So that pretty much recaps the 3 headlines. So obviously talking about the Dak Prescott extension and talking about Puka Nacua hitting the IR and Christian McCaffrey and the impact that he has on the Niners offense and how the Niners might look the next few weeks with him recovering and rehabbing an injury, or potentially with him even sitting out and missing more time. Next, we're going to get into each of the games. We each have 5 games to break down, starting with the Friday night game. If you watched the last episode, we broke down the Thursday night football game. So if you haven't tuned into that, make sure you watch that video. So I'll start because I have the Eagles and Packers. For me, this was a big game for both teams. Both teams that I would consider NFC contenders. This was a great game. I want to focus more on the Eagles because they were the winning team. Eagles won 34-29. If you remember, this game was in Brazil. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think Jalen Hurts was unbelievable. I think looking at the stat line, he did well. 278 yards is not something to not talk about. 2 touchdowns is obviously very impressive as well. But the 2 interceptions hurt him. The player that I want to talk about on the Eagles is Saquon Barkley. 24 carries, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Rushing, he had a 3rd touchdown. Receiving. And I just want to say that the Eagles' offensive line, while the tush push may have not been working as it used to without Jason Kelce and Cam Jurgens kind of adjusting to that center role, because I think he switched over from guard previously, the Eagles' offensive line is a tremendous upgrade for Saquon Barkley if you look at where he was coming from. So having 3 total touchdowns on the night, just the impact that he had on their offense with that upgraded offensive line is something to not talk about. And if he can stay healthy all year, since Jalen Hurts took over at quarterback, they haven't had like a star running back. It's really been more of the passing game. They've had, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. They've had Dallas Goedert. But now you throw Saquon Barkley in the mix. Obviously, not having Jason Kelsey it still hurts them. But I mean, this is still an insanely good offensive line. And if they can block like they did the other night for Barkley, but now I'll switch over to the Packers. For them, again, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a bad night. I think the second half of the game, they couldn't really stay in it. But the first half, they were really in this game. I thought their defense did well. Another former Giant, Xavier McKinney, first interception on Jalen Hurts of the year. Jaden Reed was their best player on offense, 4 receptions, 138 yards and a touchdown. Looking forward at the Packers, Jordan Love is going to miss some time. He's going to be put on the IR. He was injured in the final minute. So we're going to talk about waiver wire pickups if you're in a deeper league, in a dynasty league. I'll just say now I think Malik Willis is going to be named the starter. There were rumors, some buzz that they might pursue Ryan Tannehill, but it seems like they traded for Malik Willis not too long ago. Seems like they're going to go with Malik Willis. So if you're in one of those leagues, we're going to talk about this later, but you could potentially explore looking into him as a second or third quarterback in one of those deeper leagues, but it's going to hurt the Packers. Obviously, losing your franchise quarterback, one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league, it's going to hurt you. But if Malik Willis can play now, if he can exceed expectations, which it's going to be a lot to ask because, obviously a Tennessee Titans pick was not drafted by the Packers, Matt LaFleur. There's a lot that needs to be determined. There's a lot that the Packers need to do. I'm not going to just say that they're going to be okay. I think they're going to be all right, but adjusting to a new quarterback who really hasn't been here that long and is still young and is still developing, clearly they see something in him, but it's going to take some time. I do, however, think this means more production for Josh Jacobs. I do think they're going to be rushing the ball more, and he did look good the other night as well. We'll move on to the next game, which was Steelers-Falcons, and Mark, you have that one, so you can take it away with the Steelers and Falcons.
I don't think anyone thought that the Falcons were going to lose. They didn't really get blown out of the game. It was a disaster, just kind of all over the board in terms of fantasy and just in terms of gameplay as well. I'll just start off with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I don't really think that their offense won this game. I really think it was their defense that propelled them to win the game. But I mean, looking at offensive production, I think George Pickens had a solid game. He had 6 receptions for 85 receiving yards. He's the consensus wide receiver 1 on the Steelers, so good for him there. Justin Fields, I think he did exactly what everyone thought he was going to do. Less than 200 total passing yards, getting down the field with the rushing production that he has. So, that's Justin Fields for you. Najee Harris, however, I think is one of the big takeaways here. It's pretty clear that he's the RB1 on this offense. Jaylen Warren only had 2 carries while Najee Harris had 20. And last year was a little more split between the two of them. This year, well, I mean, at least for this game, Najee Harris saw everything out of the backfield. So, I don't know what the upside is for Jaylen Warren anymore. Personally, I thought, he's a better player than Najee Harris, but, I guess the Steelers are going with Najee. So it is what it is with that. Now, moving over to the Atlanta Falcons. Well, actually, one more thing about the Steelers. I mean, TJ Watt was really causing havoc for the Falcons offense. So that could be a factor there. But I mean, looking at the Falcons offense, I mean, Kirk Cousins, man, he had just as many passing yards as Justin Fields did. That's not what you expect out of a guy who has repeatedly gotten 4,000 passing yards season over season for the past 5 years now. I mean, 1 passing touchdown and 2 interceptions, it's just not a good performance for Kirk Cousins at all. I drafted Drake London and I really thought that he was going to shine. And I mean, I don't think it's time to panic on Drake London just yet because I do think that this is probably one of the worst games we'll ever see the Falcons play this year. And I think they are just adjusting to the new offensive situation that's going on here. But yeah, if you started Drake London, he definitely burned you in fantasy just like he did for me. Kyle Pitts did end up getting away with the receiving touchdown, but I mean, he only had 3 targets. Drake London only had 3 targets. Ray McCloud was actually the number one target on the receiving, end, and I don't think that's going to stick because historically Drake London has been like the number one target on the team, and I think we'll start to see that moving forward. Bijan Robinson, I think he did exactly what you wanted him to do. Now he didn't get in the end zone, but I think he gave you his floor in terms of fantasy. Um, 18 carries for 68 rushing yards. That's only a 3.8 average, so that's not like amazing. But he got very involved on the receiving end with 5 receptions and 43 receiving yards with 5 targets. So it's good to see that Bijan Robinson, is going to produce for you on that end. Also, when we look at who is the RB1 on this offense, it is Bijan Robinson. Bijan had 18 carries to Tyler Algier's 3. So it's good to see that the Falcons are not going to repeat the mistakes of last year and make it a split backfield. Like Bijan is clearly the more talented player.
Absolutely. Certainly a low scoring game over there, but we're going to move on to the next game from the 1 o'clock window, which was Bears and Titans. So Hunter, your thoughts on the Bears and Titans?
This game didn't go exactly how we all thought it would. We thought Caleb Williams would really show out in his first game. At least I did, against kind of a subpar Titans team and defense in general. I think on the last podcast I said the Titans are like the most mediocre team in the league. Like they're just below average. They're not good. They're not good, but they're not horrible either. And I don't really think Caleb Williams took advantage of that in his first career game. 14-29 for 93 yards with receivers of DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Roma Dunze. Roma Dunze, by the way, he got hurt, and I don't know the extent of his injury, but I think it's safe to say he'll probably be out for maybe a week or two, which is unfortunate for the top 10 pick. And one of and like a fellow rookie for Caleb Williams to bond with, but that's now in the past. Yeah, I mean, 93 yards and under 50% in your first career game as the number one overall pick isn't exactly great. However, this team won, and it was really carried by the defense. I mean, 2 interceptions, like the Bears don't really do that, but they did this time, and the Bears had 0 offensive touchdowns. I think they might have had 1, but Cairo Santos had 3 field goals. Jonathan Owens, the husband of Simone Biles, had a pick 6, and they had a return touchdown late in the game. That's not going to hold up every week. I mean, you can't have the defense outscore the offense. Like, if that happens every week, then we're talking about one of the greatest defenses of all time here. But that's not going to happen. Now, obviously, it's Caleb's first game, and I think he could definitely shake it off. But the opponents each week is going to get harder from here. Like, it's as simple as that. So I do see him getting a little better this next game, but a lot of his throws were some overthrows. I know Keenan Allen and DJ Moore had potential touchdowns that were just a little too far. Like, Caleb clearly has the targets to make this work, but obviously he has to help out as well. But again, it was his first game. I'm going to cut him some slack. Defense, on the other hand, as I said before, was excellent. Will Levis had 2 picks. Will Levis had he was 19 of 32 for 127 yards. Nothing special. I honestly can't remember the last time 2 QBs in the same game had less than 150. Like, that's pretty crazy. And the score being 24-17. Like, that's not, you'd expect that score to be like 10-7 or something like that. So, anyways, Titans had 2 newcomers, 2 main newcomers this offseason with Tony Pollard and Calvin Ridley. Each of them led in their individual categories. Tony Pollard, 16 for 82 and a touchdown. Last season, he really struggled with the Cowboys. Like, it was really unfortunate because the year before, him and Zeke, he really took over Zeke's job and he became a Pro Bowler out of it. And then his last year with the Cowboys is like the full starter. He just couldn't run in between the tackles, and it didn't work out. But after 1 week, I'm not going to say that isn't the case for him on the Titans, but he's off to a good start so far. Ridley, on the other hand, I mean, he led the team and he tied for the team lead in receptions with 3, but it was only for 50 yards. He did have 7 targets, but it wasn't a very special game for him by any means, but neither was it for Will Levis. So it's obviously a two-way spectrum there. So overall in the game itself, just the main takeaway is Caleb's first start, get the jitters out of the way. Wasn't his best effort, but I could see him skyrocketing throughout the season.
Yeah, absolutely. There were only 3 rookie quarterbacks starting this past week. One of them got the win, but we'll get into the rest of those games. Obviously, Caleb Williams was the one quarterback to get the win. Might have been a little too close for comfort for the Bears, but regardless, it's a W in the win column for them. They start at 1-0. And I mean, like Hunter said, they can only get better from here. We'll see what happens with Roma Dunze. But I think that this is still a team that we can't rule out just yet in a very good division. I'm going to move on to the next game, which is me, and that is the Bills and Cardinals. Now, when we were going through the games this morning and who was going to break down what and who's going to go in depth on what, I said I wanted the Bills and Cardinals. To me, this was one of the better games of the week. I was at SiriusXM this past Sunday, had Red Zone on in the corner, but I was producing a 1 o'clock and a 4 o'clock game. This was the 1 o'clock game that I was producing, and I'm glad I was because this was a really good game. I'm going to start with the Bills. So to start out, they really didn't look great. Kyler Murray was rolling. James Conner was unbelievable through the first half of this game, and the Cardinals actually came out of the gates and they jumped out to an early lead. But once Josh Allen got going, and I don't even think it was in the passing game, it was more in the running game. That was it. That was all she wrote because he had 2 rushing touchdowns. And then James Cook, not a tremendous performance at all from him, but 19 carries, 71 yards. Not bad. I expect to see that number go up from there, that production increase from there. But 34-28, the Bills win. What I do want to focus on from the Bills' perspective is actually their defense because Dalton Kincaid didn't have a big day. Keon Coleman was their leading receiver. He had only 4 receptions for 50 yards, kind of like Calvin Ridley and what Hunter was just talking about. 50 yards, couple receptions, not really much there to talk about. But defensively, they really shut down the Cardinals and were getting to Kyler Murray in the second half. And there's one player I want to talk about, and that's Greg Rousseau, the defensive end. He had 6 solo tackles, 3 sacks, and a forced fumble. I was listening to the game, like I said, I had it on in the corner. I kept hearing his name. I had the Bills broadcast, so I kept hearing his name. Greg Rousseau, another sack. Greg Rousseau with a tackle. Stopped there by Rousseau. And he had a forced fumble as well, which was covered by the Bills. This game was insane, but if he didn't have the impact that he had, I don't know if the Cardinals would have come out, or sorry, if the Bills would have come out on top and the Cardinals would have taken them down in what would have been a huge week 1 upset. Because the Cardinals, they didn't necessarily look bad, but similar to the Bills, without the running game and James Conner and Kyler Murray, I mean, you look at the first round pick for the Cardinals, Marvin Harrison, his production was down a lot. 1 reception for 4 yards. Now, he was targeted 3 times, but would I be panicking if I have him in fantasy? I don't think so. I know the Bills defense is not as good as years past, but they really did look good the other night, and they were able to stop Marvin Harrison. Trey McBride, I think, had a solid performance. He had 5 receptions for 30 yards, targeted 9 times, but still, they really just couldn't get anything going when it came to moving the ball downfield. Now, what they could get going was special teams, the Cardinals. A lot of very good punts, a lot of very good kicks, and kick returner, DJ Dallas, kick returner. He's the first player to return a kick for a touchdown under the new kickoff format. So just with that being said, it was pretty cool to see. And I think with Tyler Bass kicking it was a good kick, but DJ Dallas able to break tackles. He had been with the Seattle Seahawks for years, but now on a new team in this new role as a kick returner, new format, you can't touch the ball until it's caught by the returner in the landing zone. It was really cool to see. And if they didn't have that and a couple of big field goals towards the end, I don't think this game would have been as close, but obviously the Bills finished out on top. And I think the player to shout out is Greg Rousseau. I also want to talk about Josh Allen. I know he's questionable after the game, but he just finds ways to drive down the field. From a fantasy perspective, he's one of the best fantasy, if not the best fantasy quarterback there is, because he just can do everything. He can throw, he can rush, he can scramble out of the pocket. He can find ways to get first down and drive down the field. I mean, he really is, he can do it all. And, if you have a quarterback like that in fantasy, you got to hold on to him. It was interesting seeing Keon Coleman for them. Obviously, a different wide receiver core. We're going to get into the Texans game, but missing out on a player like Stephon Diggs, who they've had for the last few years, who had 2 touchdowns in the Texans game, obviously it's tough to come back and, put your offense out there without one of your star players. And he's obviously, like I said, with the Texans now. But I guess if I were to shout out one more receiver, it'd be Khalil Shakir, kind of stepping up into a new role now. I wouldn't say he had a bad day. He did have a touchdown, 3 receptions for 42 yards. I don't think the Bills had their best game, but as time goes on and Josh Allen adjusts to this new offense and this defense gets more acclimated, because I did lose a lot of players. I think Hunter mentioned it in the last episode. Their entire secondary is a lot different. But again, it didn't really seem to matter because Kyler Murray went to the run more. James Conner looked phenomenal, but the one thing I want to see improve for the Cardinals is Marvin Harrison Jr. I want to see him get more involved. And obviously that will come in time. Like we were just talking about, rookies, maybe the first game jitters, really wasn't targeted that much. So that's on Kyler Murray, but we'll see what happens going there or going forward. But we'll move on. Mark, the next game is the Patriots and Bengals. So your thoughts on that game with the Bengals losing to the Patriots?
Yeah, so this one is a wild game. Not a very high scoring game, 16-10. Wasn't really a lot of passing yards from both quarterbacks, but who would expect Joe Burrow to get less than 200 passing yards? Like that is crazy. Like this is a guy that should be getting at least 250 like almost every game, but that didn't happen. Looking at the Patriots, I mean, I think the star of the show here was Ramondre Stevenson, 25 carries, 120 rushing yards, got the touchdown. That's amazing. Um, didn't really get as involved in the receiving end, but he did get 3 targets, 3 receptions for 6 yards. Not bad at all. Yeah, I mean, I think the defense looked pretty good for the New England Patriots, but I think that's only because the Bengals offense just played that bad. Starting off with Joe Burrow, only 164 passing yards. Yeah, that's not something you want to see out of your star like quarterback, someone that we consider to be a top 5 quarterback in the entire NFL. Um, Moving to the rushing side of things, Zach Moss did have, a majority of the carries, but he only had 9 carries and Chase Brown had only 3. So it's kind of hard to say like he's the consensus RB1. Now he did get into the end zone, so that's good. Going over to the receiving side, I really think this was just a case of Jamar Chase being out of training camp. He did have 6 receptions for 62 yards, so it's not like he had a bad day off of 6 targets. Um, T. Higgins wasn't playing. Um, yeah, there really wasn't anyone else that I would say like got super involved besides Andre Iosivas. I don't really know how to pronounce that name.
Yoshi
Iosivas.
Boss.
Iosivas. Yeah, just a very bad day for the Bengals. I don't think anyone expected this to take place. But I think the Bengals in the last like 5 or 6 years are only like 1-5 or so in season openers. You'd think by now they'd have this down, like especially against a Patriots team, like a team that like you should just beat. Like they're not a good team. Like their only offensive weapon is Ramondre Stevenson. Like other than that, no one else is really shining here. Defensive side of things, like they're not a very good defense either, but they looked like a good one against the Bengals, and the Bengals should be like top 10 offense in the league. So I guess it's just kind of a disappointment to see that the Bengals just didn't have it on Sunday. But, I think we should expect only progression from here as opposed to regression. They just need to get their kinks figured out and start ironing out things that need to be ironed out. And I think we should see the Bengals doing better moving forward.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with the Bengals going forward. Obviously, Joe Burrow needs to stay healthy. Jamar Chase still hasn't got the extension done. And then T. Higgins obviously coming back from the injury. And I think they should be able to bounce back, but they got a tough matchup now against the Kansas City Chiefs. So we'll see. We all were pretty high on the Bengals. And I asked you guys a couple of episodes ago, what do they need to do to get back to that Super Bowl? Well, I think they need to beat some of the bad teams. So, Mark, I think you're right. They need to find a way to beat Patriots next time around. So, but credit to the Patriots. They definitely outplayed them. We're going to move on now, Hunter. The Dolphins and Jaguars, another game that I would consider one of the games of the week. Really came down to the wire in that one. But at the end of the day, the Dolphins finished out on top. So, your thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of surprising. I thought the Dolphins would win this one, not necessarily relatively easily, but I think they'd win by at least like 10 or so. But I think they were down either 10-0 or 17-0 early. And that was pretty scary considering you got like five fastest guys in the NFL on your team, on your offense, I should say. But then they really picked it up. Tyreek Hill started to get going. Jalen Waddle, who left the game like midway through due to like concussion protocol, but then came back. He still balled out. Um, Devin Achan, like I was stunned, like with his receiving effort. Like rushing wise, he only went 10 for 24 and he got a touchdown, which helps fantasy managers. But receiving, this is a running back getting in his second year getting 7 receptions for 76 yards when his competition is the best receiving duo in the league, you could argue, with Waddle and Hill. So I was really impressed with him. Tyreek Hill's 80-yard touchdown really just kind of blew the game open. That was awesome. Fantasy owners like myself. Tua finished last year as I think first in the league in passing touchdowns and passing yards, and I think he's well on his way again. 23 for 37, 338 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, that touchdown number could be boosted up one or two notches, but 9.1 yards per throw is actually pretty solid. I'm not I can't really critique that. But then Jaguars, things slowed down in that second half as they didn't score a single point, not 1 point. Trevor Lawrence, 12 of 21, 162 yards and a touchdown. Nothing to be not necessarily happy about, but nothing to be thrilled about. Really not the best game in the world from him. But his receiving targets, it's not the best receiving group in the league. You got Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas Jr., and Christian Kirk. Brian Thomas Jr. had a nice debut on the LSU first round pick. 4 receptions, 47 yards, and a touchdown. That was pretty solid. But one thing to really keep in mind here was the running backs. Now, last season, people were pretty high on this Auburn rookie. I think he was a rookie then, named Tank Bigsby. And even though ETN was in the backfield, now Bigsby didn't really do anything last season. So that kind of shut down the rumors a little bit of that he'd be a good player. But that was not really the case on Sunday now, as Bigsby and ETN each had the same amount of carries, but Bigsby had 6.1 yards per carry compared to ETN 3.7. So that's really something interesting to monitor. I would probably assume that ETN is still the full-time starter and will probably get more reps than Bigsby from here on out because, I mean, he does deserve it. He hasn't done anything really wrong since he's gotten into the league. Like, he's been a relatively consistent player. Traditionally, he's like a top 15 running back year in, year out since he's gotten in the league like 4 or 5 years ago now. But yeah, I don't really know what exactly to expect from there. Besides that, I think ETN will be the main starter. and Bigsby will probably get, I don't know, maybe like 7 to 8 touches instead of what I say, 12. Yeah, 12. So that's my analysis. Mainly Dolphins really came up clutch in the second half on both ends of the ball.
I would just like to add in one thing about the Dolphins,
Yep.
specifically Devon Achane. I think if you're a fantasy owner, like I am of Devon Achane, I think you're really happy with what you saw. I know his rushing like efficiency was not very high, but I mean, based off of what he did last year when rushing the ball and what he did last game, I expect that to pick up. I think every running back is just going to have, bad efficiency days. But if you look at everyone else, like Raheem Mostert, 1.5 yards per carry, he had 6 carries. Like that's not good. Devon Achane really getting involved in the receiving end is exactly what you wanted to see because there was a lot of check boxes that, we needed to see for Devon Achane. Getting the most carries, getting involved in the receiving end, and that's exactly what happened in the game. And, this is like a kind of like a Jahmyr Gibbs situation here. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is splitting the backfield with David Montgomery. Like, I don't think David Montgomery is like completely out of the offense because if you look at their fantasy production, they had around the same fantasy points. But, in the case of Devon Achane, I think the Dolphins are really starting to trust him, I would say, and especially using him on the receiving end. I mean, 7 receptions, 76 receiving yards, like that's really good for a running back. So that's all I have to say for that, but I just wanted to like make that point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just real quick. I mean, the fact that I forgot to even mention Raheem Mostert, guy led the league in touchdowns last season and had like 2 carries, something like that.
He
Well,
had
yeah.
6 for 9 yards.
Yes. Okay. Like that's a huge difference. Like fantasy, like analysts were saying that he'd probably take a big dip, and so far they're correct. Which is really surprising because, like I said, he led the league in touchdowns last year, and him and HN as a 1-2 punch was super electric. And I don't think he's going to be doing anything near that from last season to this season. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Just on that, like real quick, I said in the last episode, or two maybe when we were talking about each team, I think there's a chance Jalen Wright could move ahead of Raheem Mostert in the depth chart, and I still stand with that point. It's sort of a bold take, but um, obviously, like you said, the leading rushing touchdowns leader from last year, but aging running back Devon Achane is going to get more of the snaps there, more of the carries. And then you draft a running back like Jalen Wright, who I think has a lot of upside to him. So I'd be interested to see how Raheem Mostert is used. Maybe they convert him into more of a receiving back, but I don't know. Like you said, six carries for 9 yards is not. I'm not impressed by that, especially after the season he had last year. It doesn't really jump out off the stat chart to me. So, but moving on here, and to one that I've been wanting to talk about, being the Giants and the Vikings. I'm going to start with this. This is my game, but I'm going to let Mark chime in if he has anything on his team. And he was there as well. But starting with the New York Giants, the Giants, I don't even want to say they could have looked better offensively and defensively. They looked bad offensively and defensively. And this is a team that obviously they improved their offensive line this offseason, and they improved their defense this offseason with Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau obviously taking a leap, as opposite him as the other edge rusher, Dexter Lawrence as the nose tackle or defensive tackle. But you wouldn't know it based off of their performances on offense and defense. But regardless, I'm not even going to touch on the defense. They could have been better. That's all I'm going to say. And they'll get better as time goes on. I want to focus here on the offense because it all starts with their quarterback, Daniel Jones, under center. Daniel Jones, his stat line, he did throw for 186 yards, but he threw 2 interceptions, including a pick 6. He had 0 touchdowns, and their quarterback rating was 16.6. 16.6. His rating overall was 44.3. Malik Neighbors was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 66 yards, but we need to see more. I found this stat and I really wanted to mention it. Daniel Jones and Mark posted this on the Instagram as well, but Daniel Jones has thrown 3 pick sixes and only 2 touchdowns since signing his 4-year, $160 million contract. And I know he was injured last year, but he has more pick sixes than touchdowns since that contract extension. So he's going to get some good people fired if he keeps this up because, and now I'm going to shift gears into what I think they need to do. I don't even think Daniel Jones is a bad person. I don't think he's a bad leader, maybe off the field, but he lacks confidence. And I don't expect the Giants to win a bunch of games this year or even make a playoff push. The expectation, the bar is low for the New York Giants this year. But if they want Daniel Jones under center as their quarterback, I don't know who. We're trying to predict how many wins they're going to get. I've seen it all. I've seen enough from him. So when I say he's going to get some good people fired, I mean, I really like Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. Now, every head coach and GM is going to get criticized. Every, head coach and GM is going to get, I guess, berated with, questions. Why did you make that decision? Why did you do this? Joe Schoen is going to be looked at as the GM who re-signed Daniel Jones and let Saquon Barkley walked. But I actually happen to like him as a person. I think he did a lot to improve this team. It may not show it right now, and obviously those decisions are not looking great for him. And Brian Daboll, as a head coach, if you remember, he's been, the guy who's been able to develop quarterbacks throughout his career as a coach. He did it in Buffalo with Josh Allen. He was part of Alabama's offense, as Hunter knows, and was able to develop some of the quarterbacks there under Nick Saban for a while. Throughout his career, he worked with Brett Favre when he was with the Jets. Obviously, he wasn't developing at the time, but he's so good at cracking quarterbacks and finally, realizing what they need to take that next step in developing them. But Daniel Jones was drafted by the previous regime, and that was Dave Gettleman, and they need to bring in their own guy. But short term, I don't know, and I know we talked about Ryan Tannehill. I don't know if they need to go Drew Lock. I don't know if they should pursue Ryan Tannehill. Obviously, he has an AFC championship appearance under his belt. He's been on winning teams. Jameis Winston, if the Browns make him available, should they trade for him? I'm only saying this because, again, I don't think the Giants need to make a playoff push. Well, I think they need to make a playoff push, but they're not going to. I don't think they're going to win that many games, but I want to at least be hopeful as a fan, and I want to know that they're going to win some games. I don't want to sit here every game, every Sunday and say, well, another Giants loss. I don't want them to go defeated. And with Daniel Jones under center, I'm just looking at their schedule, and I just maybe week 10 in Germany against Carolina. I mean, they got the Commanders next week, and I know we're going to get into that game this past week, but Jaden Daniels didn't look that bad, so I'm just looking at the schedule. Maybe they take one over the Colts, but I think the Colts are better than them. The Falcons are better than them. The Saints looked great this past week, and we're going to get into all of those games, but I don't know what they're going to need to do, and I don't want this to be an overreaction. I don't want John Mara to look at this team and say, all right, Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, it's been 3 years, you're out. I want them to bring in their own guy after this year, whether that's Quinn Ewers, whether that's, I don't really love Shedeur Sanders. I just think there's a lot that comes with him and his dad and his, just his ego. But if he's the fit, if he's the guy, sure. If it's Carson Beck, sure. Whoever it is, I don't know who they're going to end up drafting. I just want to see Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll develop that guy. I want them to bring their own guy in because it's not working with Brian Daboll. And the last thing I'll say real quick on them, and then, I'll get into a little bit of the Vikings, but I'll let Mark take the reins on that because he was there and that's his team. But the last thing I'll say on the Giants is if it's Drew Lock, I'm not a huge Tommy DeVito guy, but you improved your offensive line from last year, which was one of the worst. You could argue the worst in the league. You improved that this year. And this is why I say it's a Daniel Jones issue. I don't even think it's the offensive line. I don't even think it's the receivers. The defense obviously could be better, but he just lacks confidence. He can't get the ball down the field. I don't know what you have to do, but if you put DeVito back there, I think he at least throws for a touchdown over Jones because he did well with a worse offensive line last year. And now he has guys like Jermaine Illuminor, John Runyon, Greg Van Roten. Andrew Thomas is still there on the left side. I don't think they're a bad O-line. Now, granted, Daniel Jones got sacked 5 times by the defensive line. Really good defensive line by the Vikings. They did everything right, But I just think there needs to be change. And they, like I said last episode, they have a lot of work to do. And the last thing I'll say in the Giants, and then Mark, if you have anything to say about the Vikings before we move on, we can. I tweeted this out, and I just want to say the Giants defense. I tweeted this out mid-game. I said the Giants defense is making Sam Darnold look like the MVP, while Daniel Jones is making the Vikings defense look like one of the best in the league. And I'm not saying that the defense was amazing. I said it already. I think there needs to be improvements, but Daniel Jones, it all starts on him. Now, would I go as far as booing him as he leaves the stadium? No. I mean, show the guy some respect. He's already dealing with enough. That's ridiculous. And I'm embarrassed that my fan base did that, but there needs to be changes on offense. And actually, one more thing. Jordan Renan tweeted this out. Really good reporter for the New York Giants. Interesting play time decision by the Giants. Jalen Hyatt was on the field for just 4 plays through the first 3 quarters, and he logged 15 total snaps in the contest. Hunter said it last time. Jalen Hyatt looked like the best player when he was at preseason last year. Where is he? Why is he not getting snaps? That basically means four snaps in 3 quarters. That means they used him 11 times in the 4th quarter, and that game was already decided. So they used him in garbage time. You drafted this guy not 2 years ago, pretty high, like 2nd or 3rd round pick.
He was a rookie last year.
Yeah, or last year. So he was what? I think he was a 2nd round pick, right?
3rd, I think.
3rd? Okay, yeah, because
day 2. Yeah.
John Michael Schmitz, and then 3rd round pick. Still, there was a lot of praise and probably, there's a lot of upside with him. He's a deep route, he's fast. Like, where is he? Why are we using him 4 snaps in 3 quarters and then using him the rest of the way in garbage time? So I think Brian Daboll really needs to sit down and he needs to reevaluate this offense. And like I said, whether it's trading for Jameis Winston, maybe pursuing Ryan Tannehill, I mean, just having that veteran, being a little hopeful. Okay, we have a chance to win a few games. Like, again, I'm not expecting to make the playoffs or win a bunch of games, but I think it's fair to say Daniel Jones has got to go. So, and then as for next year, I hope they stick around because I want to see them develop a quarterback. Like I said, I don't really have much to talk about with the Vikings. Justin Jefferson is really fun. And when he's healthy, it doesn't even matter who's throwing him the ball. When they went for it on 4th and goal, I mean, obviously I was hurt as a Giants fan, but having him in fantasy and him scoring that touchdown, I was like, you know what? If there's one positive from this game, it's like we get to watch someone like that. But even Mark said before we started recording, like he was at this game and it was so boring he wanted to leave as a Vikings fan. 28-6 Vikings win. Giants got to bounce back. They have Commanders next week. Mark, if you have any other comments on the Vikings or just the game all around, I'll let you touch on that and then we'll move on to the next game.
Yeah, I'll just be very quick on it. I think the Vikings, I don't think they're going to win 28-6 every game that they play, but I think Aaron Jones looked very good. Justin Jefferson looked very good. Jordan Addison's status, I think he got injured, so we'll monitor that. As for the Giants, I mean, man, I was at the game and you legitimately saw some of these guys wide open. Like the Vikings defense, yeah, they played good yesterday. I'm not gonna say they didn't, but they're not as good as the Browns, the Cowboys, the 49ers. Come on. Some of these Giants wide receivers were wide open. It's just a case of Daniel Jones just not trusting what he's seeing down on the field, lacking the confidence. Also, he's throwing the ball behind these guys, and that's a chance to really actually advance the ball down the field. And in the case for fantasy, I mean, everyone was so high on Malik Neighbors, and they're like, oh, he's gonna be the wide receiver 1. He's gonna be all this. And yeah, you might be right, but do you really want to target share on a guy that we've seen play for the past 5 years now, 6 years, and just doesn't, there was no red zone opportunity for the Giants at all. 0, not a single one. So that upside's already gone. So if we take that into consideration, I mean, what's Malik Neighbors' ceiling? Maybe 15 points in fantasy? That's a ceiling. For what you drafted him at, that should be
And let me just add, this is a guy that's being compared to Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and the LSU connection. I don't necessarily blame him for that. He's a rookie, and I think he is going to be really good. But like I said, you need a better quarterback throwing him the ball, and then that ceiling will go up. So sorry to cut you off, but I don't hate him. I think he's still going to be really good. But at least for this year, short term, unless there's changes at quarterback, I agree with you. I really can't look at him as like a good flex option this year. So
Yeah. Now, like, did he perform better than guys like Zay Flowers and Drake London, all those guys? Absolutely. But at
yeah,
least with those guys, we can say, okay, they hit their floor, Zay Flowers. Okay, it was just a really bad game, Drake London. Like, it's only going to get worse. Like if you maybe not next week because they're playing the Commanders, but from after that game, like they're playing against Baltimore, Dallas, like all of these great teams. Like, what do you expect the Giants to be able to do against them? And I feel really bad because like they got a lot of good players on this team. Like Devin Singletary, like he's not like a great running back, but he's not a bad one either. Malik Neighbors, like he's a really good wide receiver, and I think he showed what he can do yesterday. Um, Wan'Dale Robinson, has gotten praise from CD Lamb, like Hunter said. I don't know why this offense doesn't use Jalen Hyatt, but whatever. I don't know what you're gonna do about that. Yeah, that's enough about this game. I think we could talk all day
yeah.
long about
Let's
how
move
bad the
on.
Giants. So let's
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 move
move
on from
on.
the Giants. I agree. Let's move on. Mark, I'm going to stick with you. There's 2 1 o'clock games left. You have both of them. Saints Panthers and Texans Colts. So you can start with the good or start with the bad here, because we're talking about one of the worst games, minus the Giants. Maybe I mean the Panthers Saints game wasn't that entertaining.
Yeah.
But then you look at the Texans Colts game, which was very entertaining. So I'll let
Exactly
you
Yeah.
take
what happened.
So why don't
I'll
we
let
why
you
don't we
take the
save
floor
the
on both of these here.
why don't we save the best for last? So we're gonna start off with the Saints and the Panthers. I mean, in terms of, this is a case of where, you have a team playing against a really bad team and they should absolutely destroy them, and that's exactly what happened. That didn't happen with the Bengals and the Patriots, but it happened in this game. Um, 47-10. I mean, man, they were having a freaking party out there. Like they were just having fun playing football. I mean, there's really nothing to talk about with the Carolina. Like, we thought Chuba Hubbard's gonna be the guy, but he's not. Miles Sanders, I guess he's still playing. Um, I guess one good thing to take away from this is that Xavier Legette like had the most targets, but I mean like, this is just a bad team as well. So let's move on from that. Um, Going over to the Saints, Derek Carr, he actually looked really good. 3 passing touchdowns, only 200 passing yards, so not like crazy, but at least he showed up. Alvin Kamara actually had a really good day. 15 carries, 83 yards, so that's a 5.5 average right there. He gets the rushing touchdown. But you also see Jamal Williams get involved as well with 11 carries himself. Now, do I think it's going to be a split backfield between Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams? I don't think so. I think as the season goes on, we're going to see Alvin Kamara just start to be the more lead back. But I think just because they had so much offensive production, that's why Jamal Williams was able to get involved. Now, I think the big takeaway here is the receiving end of this. I think this is where things start to look really good, but also look really ugly at the same time. Rashid Shaheed, 5 targets, 3 receptions, 73 yards, gets a touchdown. Alvin Kamara, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 27 yards. Jawan Johnson, 2 receptions, 3 targets, 26 receiving yards, 1 touchdown. Jamal Williams gets 1 target with 13 receiving yards. And who's the last receiver on this team? Chris Olave does not get involved whatsoever. 2 targets, 2 receptions, 11 yards for a second round wide receiver pick.
And fantasy.
Now, in fantasy, forgot to mention that. I did everything I could to stay away from this man. I did not want Chris Olave on my team because I knew that Derek Carr just does not support guys that can really advance the ball down the field like Chris Olave can, and that's exactly what you saw last night. Derek Carr is a check down princess, and it's really good for guys like Alvin Kamara, but when we're talking about a guy like Chris Olave who plays in the slot, really is the guy that you want to be moving the ball down the field. It just did not go well for him. Do I expect his production to go up? Yes, but this is nothing new. Like last year, like Chris Olave had multiple games as well where he just dropped you a doozy in fantasy. And that's what happened on Sunday. And I don't know if it's time to start hitting the panic button, but I also think it's a potential buy low candidate in fantasy. Like if you wanted to trade for him because you just really wanted Chris Olave, I think you could get him for pretty cheap. So, that's enough about that game. Just an absolute blowout. If you had Alvin Kamara, exactly what you wanted. But let's move on to the Texans and the Colts. This is the game I want to talk about. Man, let's just start off with the Colts here because I think the Colts also played really well. Anthony Richardson, man, I think if you took a risk on him and drafting him in fantasy, it 100% paid off for you. He had 212 passing yards, nothing crazy once again, but two passing touchdowns, only one interception. He also gets a rushing touchdown, so that's really good. Really good fantasy production there. Jonathan Taylor, he had 16 carries, so the backfield is his. But I think the scary thing is that it looks like Anthony Richardson could possibly steal some red zone opportunities from Jonathan Taylor. So I'm not going to hit the panic button on Jonathan Taylor, but, he only gave you 10 fantasy points as someone who is a first round pick in fantasy. Looking at the receiving end, I mean, man, Anthony Richardson with that bomb down the field to Alec Pierce, like that was awesome. Like really cool. Alec Pierce had 3 receptions, 125 receiving yards. Like that is nuts. Now, looking at Michael Pittman, he didn't have a great fantasy day, but I still think he had 8 targets. He's clearly the wide receiver one on this team, out of 19 passing attempts. So that's almost a 50% target share right there. I think those are the big takeaways from Indianapolis for me. So let's move on to the Texans, which is more entertaining. CJ Stroud, man, he just continues to be the dominant quarterback that we all think he's going to be. 234 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, no interceptions. Perfect day for CJ Stroud. And moving on to the running back side of things, Joe Mixon getting extremely involved in the running game with 30 carries and 159 rushing yards. Like that is absolutely insane. He also gets in the end zone for 1 touchdown. I think Joe Mixon is going to continue to be a guy who profits from being on a good offense, and that's exactly what you see from Joe Mixon. And I think he's going to continue to be a fantasy stud. I don't think he's going to give you exactly what he gave you this past weekend, but I think he's someone who is a must-start guy every single week, and he's going to continue to give you at least a floor of 15 points. So, we can move on from that. Going to the receiving end, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs all got very involved. 8 targets for Nico Collins, 7 for Tank Dell, and 6 for Stephon Diggs. Now with Nico Collins, he had 6 receptions for 117 receiving yards, so he actually walks away with the most receiving yards on the team. Good for him. Tank Dell, only 3 receptions for 40 yards, but that's off of 7 targets, so I think we'll continue to see his production actually go up. So I think he remains a flex option, like very high-end flex option. And then moving over to Stephon Diggs, 6 receptions for only 33 receiving yards, but he gets in the end zone twice for 2 touchdowns. So really good for Stephon Diggs. Um, when I was watching the game, I really think that Stephon Diggs is just going to be the guy on the team who runs, inside the slot, gets the very short, like, I don't want to say check down passes, but is it necessarily going to be like the deep threat that both Nico Collins and Tank Dell are going to be? So, that's my takeaway from these two teams. I think Anthony Richardson is going to continue to be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy every single week, and I think CJ Stroud is just going to show why that the Texans are going to be the AFC's potential #1 team this year. So, that's all I have to say about this game.
Moving on to the 4 o'clock games. We got 4 games, starting with Hunter, the Commanders, and Buccaneers.
Yeah, so earlier in the podcast, I was talking about Caleb Williams kind of having a rough start in his first career game. Caleb Williams was the #1 overall pick. The #2 overall pick was Jaden Daniels for the Commanders, and the same can't really be said for him. He actually had a really solid game. I mean, passing wise, 17 for 24 for 184 yards. No other stats there, no picks, no touchdowns. It's whatever. It's okay. I mean, the 17 of 24 part's pretty good. But obviously you could boost those yardage numbers a little bit more. Only 7.7 yards per pass, should be like probably 2 extra yards from that. However, running side, that's where he really excelled. 16 carries, 16 for a quarterback. That's crazy. His first career game for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. And a lot of those carries were in the red zone, meaning that he could get a lot more scores that way for fantasy players. And I was impressed with his debut. I'm not going to say it's the best debut I've ever seen, but I think he really did a solid job against a very talented Bucs team. That's really it for Commanders. Like the receiving wise, like everyone was kind of spread out. Austin Eckler led the way with 4 catches for 52 yards, running back, by the way. And he actually was like the backup running back. Brian Robinson Jr. is the starter now. He had 12 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown. Nothing crazy at all. But they lost the game to the Buccaneers. Buccaneers, man, Baker Mayfield was out of this world, dude. 24 for 30, 289 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. That's crazy, dude. Like that's absurd. Like his comeback has been awesome. Like for like he had like 1 good year with the Browns and then he just completely fell off. Everyone's calling him a bust. He goes to like the Rams and the Panthers, does nothing there. Then he goes to the Bucs last season, takes him to the playoffs, and is a really good QB. And this year he's definitely off to that same start. I was amazed with him overall. In the rushing end, I liked Bucky Irving a lot, the Oregon rookie. I thought he was very similar to Rachaad White as a player comparison and just as a receiving back, but also kind of a quick runner as well. And they really split the field. Rachaad White, 15 carries for 31 yards, really not great. Bucky Irving, meanwhile, it was 9 for 62. I'm assuming Rachaad White will still take over with more snaps and more carries, but it's something to really monitor as potential 1-2 punch in this league. That would really be something to see that. On the receiving end, Baker spread the ball out pretty well between 3 guys. Godwin, 8 for 83 and a touchdown on 8 targets. Jesus. That's ridiculous. Rachaad White, 6 receptions for 75 yards on 6 targets. Really solid for Rachaad White there. Like I just said, he's great as a receiving back, and that just proved it. Mike Evans, I mean, come on. Like the most consistent wide receiver, arguably the most consistent player since I've been watching football. And I've been watching football longer than he's been in the league. Like, it's He had 5 receptions for 61 yards, but he also had 2 touchdowns. And one of his touchdowns was a ridiculous catch where he had to adjust in the left corner of the end zone. It was an amazing throw by Baker too. But I mean, Mike Evans had a little less like yards than his typical day because he's going to get you 1,000 yards per season every single season, and still the 2 touchdowns, and that's huge for fantasy owners. I mean, that's pretty much it on this game. I think the Bucks defense did a pretty solid job overall. Antoine Winfield's going to be out for a little bit. Forgot to touch on that. So that's actually a big loss. It's not like a long-term thing, but I forgot exactly what the injury is, but I know he's going to be out for a couple weeks. And he's their best player on defense, you could argue. You could argue Levante David in there as well, but I think it's probably Antoine Winfield Jr. Yeah, I simply put, Bucks had a really good day, and the Commanders had actually a pretty solid day despite the 17 score difference.
Yeah, sure. Moving on to the 4 o'clock games, or the rest of the 4 o'clock games, rather. I got 2 here: Seattle and the Broncos, and Raiders and Chargers. Talk about the Raiders and Chargers first, because I don't have much to say about it. For the Chargers coming out on top 22-10, they really just dominated this game throughout. I really don't have much to say on the Raiders. I mean, Gardner Minshew, I think, was okay. 257 yards, a touchdown, did throw an interception. Didn't see much of Devontae Adams. Jacoby Myers, on the other hand, most targeted receiver, 3 receptions, 61 yards. Would have liked to have seen more Brock Bowers, but I was going up against him in fantasy, so I guess I'm okay with him not having the best week. But same thing, we talk about a lot of these rookies, Marvin Harrison, some of these quarterbacks. I think we're going to talk about rookies that had the best week 1 performance. It was like Hunter just said, Jaden Daniels, because I'm looking at some of these rookies and I just, I don't know yet. Malik Neighbors could have had a better week. Yeah, he didn't do bad, but obviously that's going to come with time. And with rookies, that is going to come with time. Get some of those jitters out of the way, especially the week 1. Running wise, Madison wasn't too bad. I believe he had their only touchdown for the Raiders. He's a guy that really needs to have the right fit. He was in Minnesota last year and it wasn't a good fit for him. So I think now that he's on a new offense, we're talking about Zamir White potentially taking that RB1 role, but maybe Alexander Madison can finally start clicking. I mean, this is a rebuilding team. We were even talking about Devontae Adams maybe on the way out. As for defense, I mean, Max Crosby is always going to give you good stats. I don't have the defensive stats in front of me right now, but the defense let up 22 points, mainly by way of field goals. I mean, the Chargers only had 1 touchdown as well, but this just wasn't a great game, so I'm not going to keep talking about it much. Do want to say 2 things on the Chargers. Their best player, he got the game ball. I saw the video on Twitter. It was J.K. Dobbins. And that's really good to see for him. 19 carries, 135 yards, and that 1 touchdown. The rest of it was field goals for them. They won 22-10, but really good to see for J.K. Dobbins. They have Dobbins and Gus Edwards, who were both previously with the Baltimore Ravens. So to finally see a Chargers running back not name Austin Eckler, and also to see Dobbins finally excel. He's a guy that struggled with injuries throughout, his career. And if he's able to stay healthy, I mean, I think he's great. I always try and stay away from him and him and Edwards, because both of them tend to get injured more, and are on the injury prone side. But if this is what we're going to see out of him now in LA, I mean, I think that he's going to do pretty well. But I'd also like to see Justin Herbert throw the ball a little bit more. Didn't really see much of Josh Palmer. Lad McConkey was okay. I mean, again, there really wasn't much to highlight here, but Coach Harbaugh gets the first win, and the Chargers are in the win category. The Raiders, they, like the Giants, have a lot of work to do, and I think they will be rebuilding. But moving on from that game, I'm just going to touch on my second 4 o'clock game, and then we'll move on. So this was the Seahawks and the Broncos, the Russell Wilson, Drew Lock game. Another one that wasn't great, but definitely more entertaining than the Raiders Chargers, in my opinion. I had this game for SiriusXM as well. So the Bills Cardinals was my 1 o'clock game. This was my 4 o'clock game. You want to stick with the rookie topic? Bo Nix didn't look terrible, but was not good overall. definitely gave Seattle a run for their money. They kept it close. I mean, the final score was 26-20. So I don't think, he did bad. He was able to keep them in the game, but Denver's defense was more impressive than their offense for sure. They forced 2 safeties on Seattle's offense, which is something I can't say I haven't seen. But just to read off Bo Nix, 26 of 42, 138 yards, and he was intercepted twice. If you want to talk about defense, Seattle's defense was way better. Julian Love had one of those interceptions, and then Reek Woolen had the other one in the fourth quarter. They finished with 231 total yards, and the Broncos offense committed 3 turnovers. So Seattle's defense, I picked them up in fantasy in my redraft league. I ended up sitting Kansas City this week. I don't usually carry 2 defenses with me, but this week I decided to do it. They got me 11 points. Kansas City's D had -2 on my bench because while they won, the Ravens are still a good team, and it wasn't a favorable matchup for them. For offensive players on Seattle's side, Geno Smith really struggled. I don't highlight him as somebody that played well, but I do want to talk about their offensive weapons because I think while he didn't necessarily have the best game and some of those early struggles were his fault, and really couldn't find a rhythm early on, I think that he was able to spread the ball pretty well, especially in the running game. Kenneth Walker was unbelievable, especially in the second half. He had 103 yards and 84 of them came in the second half. He had a touchdown in the second half. And that was after he had some sloppy mistakes in the first half, fumbling the ball. And I mean, he recovered the fumble, but just didn't look great. Zach Charbonnet had a 30-yard touchdown pass, their RB2, or reception rather. That was the first play of the fourth quarter. It really wasn't a bad performance for Seattle's offense. And then, we talk about DK Metcalf and JSN, and people forgetting Tyler Lockett, and he's saying, slow down, don't forget about me. Like, don't count me out. Like, because he had a pretty good performance as well. He was there leading the receiver. And if you remember late in that quarter, he kind of iced the game for Seattle. He had a one-handed catch, which converted on third down. And that was the last of his 6 receptions. So Lockett, I think a pretty good day for him. 6 receptions and 77 yards. And they said this on the broadcast too, because I had Seattle's broadcast for SiriusXM. One of his first reception, he surpassed 8,000 career receiving yards. So congrats to Lockett on that. The Seahawks move on and they won 26-20. So that recaps all of my games. We're going to move on to the last 4:00 game, which Mark has, which is the Cowboys and Browns. And then we'll wrap it up with Hunter, who has the Lions and Rams on Sunday night and Jets and Niners on Monday night. So Mark, Cowboys and Browns to round out the 4:00 games.
Yeah, what a disaster this was on the Cleveland Browns side of things. I think we were all right on the money with this, which was that, their defense was really good, but the offense needs a lot of work. Deshaun Watson, man, he just got his contract restructured. Second highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and what do you get out of him? 169 passing yards, 3.8 per attempt. One passing touchdown and 2 interceptions. Yeah, I think the Browns are in trouble, and I don't know when it's going to be time to hit the panic button. I don't want to be that guy that says it's time, but maybe it's time to start looking at other quarterbacks, maybe Jameis Winston. I don't know. Rushing side of things, Jerome Ford had a pretty solid game. He had 12 carries for 44 yards, got the touchdown, so it's good to see him there. He was also very involved on the receiving end too, with 7 targets, 6 receptions, and 25 yards. So also not a bad production on the receiving end for Jerome Ford as well. I drafted him in the late rounds, and I thought he was going to be exciting. And I think he gave you some of the upside that we all think he has. Now, looking at Amari Cooper, man, what a discrepancy here. 2 receptions for 16 yards, but he had 9 targets. I think it just goes to show that, Deshaun Watson just doesn't look so good. David Njoku, 4 receptions for 44 yards on 5 targets, so not too bad there. Same thing with Jerry Jeudy. I mean, except he got in the end zone, so it's not so bad. I mean, he got 3 receptions for 25 yards, got in the end zone, but he had 8 targets. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, the Cowboys defense just had a field day with the Browns offense. You know, they actually returned a touchdown off of a punt. They got what else did they get? You know, they got an interception. Like there's just they got 2 interceptions, my bad. 2 interceptions. Like they were just all over the Cleveland Browns on Sunday. Now, looking at the offensive side of things for Dallas, I mean, this was a really good game for Dak Prescott. Well, it was a good game. I don't think it was like a great game. He had 179 passing yards with 1 passing touchdown, so not bad for him. Um, Rushing side of things, I really thought that the Cowboys said that Rico Dowdle was going to be the RB1, and that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be a split backfield between Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle. And I have a feeling that that is not going to be the case. I think Ezekiel Elliott is actually going to emerge as the RB1, but we'll see moving forward. Um, Going on to the receiving end of things, you know, for CeeDee Lamb, it wasn't a bad day for him at all. He had 5 receptions on 61 yards. He had 10 targets. So in terms of fantasy, I think he's doing exactly what you want him to do. But, you know, he just didn't get in the end zone this week, but he will. Brandon Cooks actually found the end zone off of 7 targets. So, you know, it seems that Brandon Cooks has solidified himself as the wide receiver 2 on this offense. And with Jake Ferguson, he actually went down with an injury. We will monitor that going forward, but you know, it didn't really look too good for him. Um, you know, I think on First Take they were talking about, you know, was this a statement game from the Cowboys? And I kind of think it was. I mean, everyone was talking, you know, talking down about the Cowboys all off season, myself included, and I think everyone else included as well. Um, and they went out there, you know, looked at the Cleveland Browns defense and said, "We don't care about your defense. We're going to make a game plan. We're going to make sure that Myles Garrett does not get involved at all," which he didn't get involved at all. Like they did everything they could to make sure that Myles Garrett was not going to get to Dak Prescott, and you know that was the case. And Cowboys scored 33 points, Cleveland Browns only 17. Yeah, that's all I got to say about this game. I think the Browns are in trouble, and you know, I think the Cowboys are potentially going to go 11-6 this year, like just kind of what we saw last year. So I expect to see the same thing out of the Cowboys this year, and I think the Browns are in a lot of trouble this year.
Yeah, for sure. Statement win for the Cowboys. We'll see what they do in the NFC East, and I think having them up there with the Philadelphia Eagles will definitely be interesting to watch. We're gonna move on. We saved the best for last, so Sunday night and Monday night, and Hunter has both of these games, so he'll break down Sunday night first. The Lions and the Rams, the first game of the 2024 season to go to overtime, and a very good game in my opinion. And then last night, the Monday night game, the Jets and 49ers, also a very good game as well. So Hunter, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Had to move locations real quick. But wow. What a game, man. I mean, let's see here. On the first podcast, I believe I said Jameson Williams was my breakout. I think on the second podcast, I said to watch out for Jameson Williams of this week. And here we are on the third. And Jameson Williams beat the living shit out of the Rams secondary on Sunday night, which was a blast. Yeah. So here's the deal. For fantasy perspective, I was gonna start T. Higgins, but he was announced out. And then Jameson Williams was my next choice. And I was like, you know what? that seems like an excellent idea, actually. So we started Jameson Williams. He's going to be starting for me again this week, even if T. Higgins is healthy. I don't even know what the matchup is. It doesn't matter at the moment. But man, yeah, it was really cool to see him ball out. He obviously, I went to school with him at Alabama here. He was awesome here. And last season or 2 years ago, he missed like half the season because he was recovering from a torn ACL that he suffered in the I don't remember if it was the SEC championship or the national championship. So he only played half of his rookie season. Last season, he was out for the first few weeks due to a gambling violation, a non-NFL game, by the way. And now this was his first career week 1, and he took full advantage of it. Yeah, he was incredible. So enough about Jameson Williams, although I can go on and on and on. Let's go with the lines in general, the winners of this game against the Rams. Jared Goff, typical 18, 28, 217, a touchdown and interception. He could probably do a little better, but in general, that's right around what he would typically do. Maybe a little better in general, though. The running backs. So this was really Jahmyr Gibbs' game for quarters 1 through 4. Gibbs did his thing as a runner and a receiver. It's what he came to the NFL to do. He finished with 11 carries, 40 yards and a touchdown, and had 4 catches for 34 yards. Good stuff. Nothing too crazy, but a good game nonetheless for his second season opener ever. David Montgomery, on the other hand, he was the king of the 5th quarter, if you will. All overtime, they just same game plan over and over and over and over and over again until they reached the end zone. He was just unstoppable in overtime. He broke every single tackle, and he single-handedly won them that game. In overtime, of course, not for the first 4 quarters. But Montgomery, he still did stuff like for the first 4 quarters as he ended the game, 17 carries, 91 yards, and that overtime touchdown. Good stuff there. So Jameson Williams, as I've said, had a really good game. 5 receptions, 121 yards, and a touchdown. That touchdown being from 52 yards out. But that was kind of unexpected. Because the Lions have a couple other good targets in Sam Laporta, who was rookie tight end last year, who finished up first among tight ends in touchdowns. All tight ends, not just rookies. He was a little quiet for his standards. 4 receptions, 45 yards, and 5 targets. So nothing crazy. But the real story of the bad news, I guess. I mean, they won, so it's really not bad. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, dude, like first round pick in fantasy, maybe early second. 3 receptions for 13 yards on 6 targets. The Rams clearly just had his number. Tre'Davious White, who went from the Bills to the Rams this offseason, he was on him. He was smothering him. It's from what it seemed like, and he was held very quiet for pretty much the entire game. I don't see that happening for the rest of the season. Amon-Ra St. Brown was one of the most consistent receivers in the league last year and one of the top as well. And I anticipate that'll get right back to his 2023 self, without a doubt. All right. I've not mentioned a single Ram yet, but there's really only one that I really need to mention. That's Cooper Kupp. We spoke a while ago on the podcast about the Puka Nacua injury and its impact for Kupp. And I said that Kupp had 4 catches on like the first drive alone. Garrett Wilson, I'm going to get into this soon. Garrett Wilson had 4 catches on like the first 2 drives, but that was it for him. And I was going against Kupp in fantasy, and I was hoping that would be it for him, but boy, was I wrong.
I was going up against Wilson in fantasy, so.
Oh, same. All right. Yeah. So Cooper Kupp, career high, 14 catches on 21 targets. That's absurd. I've never seen such a thing. That's like some Calvin Johnson numbers. So yeah, 110 yards and a touchdown. Now, a lot of these routes, I mean, he averaged 7.9 yards per catch. That's pretty low. He was just going for those slant routes, those out routes, anything that was going to get you about 6 or 7 yards each time. What was his long? His long was 21 yards. That's not that much at all. And that probably only happened once. I think every other one was probably about 10, 11, 6, 7 yards. Like nothing crazy, but it worked. It really worked against a very talented Lions defense. And they took him to overtime. And they almost won the game. But Lions won the coin toss and David Montgomery did his thing. Other Rams to mention, Kyron Williams, the returner, and the running back. 18 carries, 50 yards, and a touchdown. A little low on the average yards per carry of 2.8, and his long was only 9, which is not great. But he did get that touchdown to help you out. He had 3 receptions for 4 yards, which is pretty much nothing. Let's see. I don't think there was really anything else to mention about that game besides that it was probably the best game of the week. You could argue Ravens Chiefs, but this was just a thriller from start to finish. It was really evenly matched overall. I mean, I think the Lions are the better team, but for this game, I think Sean McVay really did a good job for the Rams. And so that's it for Sunday's games. Final game of the week was last night. Jets Niners. Pretty interesting stuff there. Niners offense went 3 and out. I think we discussed this before. Niners offense went 3 and out on the first drive, and then they scored on 8 straight drives. It's the Jets defense that's top 3 in the league, and you could argue that. And they did not look like it by any means. Mosley was injured for a little bit during the game. He had a wrist injury, but he still came in. Sauce, we don't know what his injury was. I want to say it was like maybe a concussion, but he was out for a bit too. And that's when the Niners really took advantage. Niners really spread the ball around overall. I think they did really just an excellent job under Shanahan's game plan of just run the ball with Debo and Jordan Mason, who really shined. Like, it definitely threw me off. 28 carries, 147 yards, and a touchdown. 5.3 yards per carry. That's excellent. That's really great. So I mean, I think McCaffrey should hope to be back next week, if not the week after. I don't think Jordan Mason's going to get 150 yards again, but who knows? Like, he had I think his career high going into the game was like 69, and he had like 67 going into the half.
They were saying, sorry to cut you off, they were saying like in the post game that he hadn't had a performance like this, not even in college. Well, definitely not in the NFL, but not even at Georgia Tech, but since high school. Jordan Mason.
How did he get to the NFL then? How did he get here?
He did well in college, but he didn't do this well, apparently.
Jeez. Yeah, I mean, wow. How about that? Well, so let's start with the Niners. Brock Purdy, 19 of 29, 231. That's a typical Brock Purdy game to me. He's going to usually throw around 250 or so, if I had to guess. So it's a little underwhelming, but not the end of the world. He got the win too. But he didn't throw a single touchdown or interception. So I think he really needs to boost that up just a bit. I guess let's go with Deebo Samuel, the wide back himself. 8 carries, 23 yards, and a touchdown with 5 receptions and 54 yards. That's what, 77? Yeah, 77 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. That's good stuff. It's tough having to play 2 different roles and doing them efficiently, and he was able to do it. So kudos to him. One guy to really mention here is Brandon Ayuk. This guy's begging for an extension or just to be traded or anything this whole offseason, and he only gets 2 catches last night. Like, he was targeted 5 times, which could have been, I guess, a little bit more, but he definitely could have gotten the ball more, could have made more catches, could have gotten open easier, but it wasn't his best performance, and that's something to really keep an eye on, as he was pretty much a Pro Bowl caliber player last year. Defensively for the Niners, I mean, my defensive player of the year pick was Fred Warner. And on the second drive of the game, he was starting to prove that. I nearly punch the ball out of Breece Hall's elbow, and man, he balled out last night. He led the team in tackles as per usual. He's always all over the field, like always. And he proved it again last night against the Jets offense that really kind of struggled, which makes me segue to the next game here, or to the next team, the Jets. Aaron Rodgers, 13 of 21, 167 yards, touchdown, and a pick. This is his first really full game in 2 seasons, as last year, after 4 snaps, he tore his Achilles against the Bills in week 1, which is pretty heartbreaking, honestly. Definitely could have been a better game from him, but again, you're going against one of the best teams in the league, if not the best. He actually didn't even play like the final drive. That was Tyrod Taylor's time, and he actually scored a touchdown on it, 6 of 8, 36 yards, and a touchdown pass to Alan Lazard, who had 2 on the game, one of which Aaron Rodgers' 1 touchdown was on a offsides draw, and he just launched it deep to Lazard, and he nailed it. And they were saying on the broadcast, I didn't know this, that he leads every NFL player with the most touchdowns on like an offsides draw play kind of thing. Breece Hall, 16 for 54 and a touchdown. Nothing too crazy. And that fumble too. His long was 16. He definitely could have had a better game. Although he did have 5 receptions for 39 yards, which is good stuff. But in general, he's a top 3 fantasy football pick this year. Like, it should be a little higher, but again, first week, can't really judge it against a top three defense really in the Niners. So I wouldn't go crazy over it. That's pretty much it. I think the Niners really had this game from start to finish, especially in the second half. They dominated in the time of possession. Garrett Wilson started off hot, but then was silent for the rest of the game. Yeah, so that's the whole recap.
There we go. So expect recaps of every game after the Monday Night Football game. And I think what we're going to do, and we'll spend the next, 5 minutes or so doing this, and then we'll wrap this up, is talk about fantasy football and some waiver wire pickups. We're a week in now. The next episode, you can expect us to preview the week 2 matchups, and then after that and beyond, recap those games. But for now, let's talk about, before Thursday night, as we record this on Tuesday, who are we picking up? So I'll start. I have 5 guys, and I'm just going to breeze through them real quick. Starting off with Puka Nacua. Hunter just alluded to it. If you have Puka Nacua, you need a receiver. Now, this guy would obviously fit more on your bench, maybe a flex option for you, but his replacement's going to be Demarcus Robinson. I think he'd be a pretty good pick for you there, because Puka Nacua, like we said, is going to, when we let off with this in the show, is going to miss at least 5 weeks, with them coming off the bye week after the guaranteed 4 weeks on the IR, and then could end up missing that 6 week, because IR is anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. Going on to my next player, I have 2 running backs here. I'm going to go with Jordan Mason. I have him on my bench, but if he's available in your league, just as a backup for Christian McCaffrey, I think he provides a really good, some really good security, some really good insurance for him, or handcuff rather is the word I was looking for. He's going to be involved, I think. Even if McCaffrey is healthy, I think they're going to have him out there, along with the loaded offense that they have, Debo and Ayuk and Kittle. So expect Jordan Mason to be involved more, and the performance that he had on Monday night was definitely a statement for him, and it was a statement win for the Niners, like Hunter just recapped. The second running back I have, and then 2 more players, is Justice Hill on the Ravens. Just don't know with Derrick Henry. He was involved a lot. If you're in a PPR league, he was on every passing play. He was on the field, and they took Derrick Henry out. So going Justice Hill there. Sticking with the Ravens, Isaiah Likely. Don't need to explain much on that. We recapped on him and the Thursday night game in the last episode, so tune into that. If Isaiah Likely is available in your league and you need a tight end, or if you didn't initially draft a backup tight end like me, but you're looking for someone to fill that open bench spot, Isaiah Likely. And then my last player for waiver wire pickups for this week, I alluded to it before earlier in the podcast, but if you're in a deeper league, a dynasty league, you kind of need one of those quarterbacks. Malik Willis, I believe the Packers did announce he is going to start. So Malik Willis could be an option. I'm sure he's available in your league. So the 5 guys again: Demarcus Robinson, Jordan Mason, Isaiah Likely, Justice Hill, and Malik Willis. Mark, Hunter, if you guys have any players or waiver wire pickups for fantasy owners who may be watching this, now's the time, and then we'll recap this and wrap everything up here.
Yeah, you might have stole all the names that I wanted to mention, but
Yeah,
I'll
go ahead.
just go through some of the names I was thinking. I think Khalil Shakir, I think Adam might have mentioned it, but definitely a player you could pick up, I think. I think, the wide receivers on Buffalo is pretty like undefined right now, and I think Khalil Shakir, like he found the end zone, had decent target volume. I think you can pick him up. Um, I think if you need a back quarterback, I mean Baker Mayfield looked really good, so I think he's definitely someone you could pick up off the waivers if he's available. Jordan Mason had his big game. Could definitely pick him up if he's available on your waivers. He's available in mine, so I might just do it. Rashid Shaheed, it kind of looks like he's gonna be involved in this New Orleans Saints offense, so I think you could definitely pick him up. There was one. Oh, yeah, Isaiah Likely. I think we mentioned him already,
Yep.
but definitely a player you could pick him. You could pick up. I really like Brandon Cooks. He's not the wide receiver one on the Cowboys, but I mean, he still finds ways to get involved even with sometimes little target volume. I mean, even on like if you look at last year, like some of the games that he had little target volume, he would walk away with a touchdown and like 14 like 10 to 14 fantasy points, and like that's solid production at a flex position. Um I think Alan Lazard as well. I mean, it seems like this guy is going to be involved on the Jets offense. So yeah, those are just some names that come to mind for me.
Yeah, little costume change here. So you guys pretty much hit all the guys I probably would have said. As much as it pains me to say this one because he kind of screwed me over in fantasy last year, but Alexander Madison really showed out for the Raiders. Him and Zamir White, like no one really knew what Zamir White was going to do this upcoming season, as he was named the starter, but he had never really started before. And it seemed like Alexander Madison took over that role pretty quickly. Not necessarily that he'd be the starter, but he just made more impact plays overall, and he found the end zone as well. So again, everyone that like we've named is not someone that you're probably going to start in week 2, but so someone to keep in mind. I mean, the main common guy that we've said here was Isaiah Likely. It's hard not to pick him up, but we don't know how it's going to work with him and Mark Andrews. Like they're 2 extremely talented tight ends, and there are very few extremely talented tight ends in the league. Very few. And 2 of them are on the same team. And could one of them be gone by the end of the season? Like who knows? But I'd be cautious with Likely. Um, it's very difficult for someone to replicate the game he had against the Chiefs. He almost had another touchdown, but we know what happened there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I would keep it in mind. So something that in my league, because we didn't really touch on this, in my league we have free agent auction budget, meaning that you kind of like bid on players. It's like a silent auction, like you don't know
Fob.
if you're gonna get them. Yeah, fob.
I
Yeah,
have that too in my dynasty league. Yeah.
yeah. So I've been trying to figure out the whole Likely thing because like we only have $100 for the whole season.
Same.
Guy
Yeah.
like Likely who just put up a crazy amount of stats. I feel like you got to go like all in for him, but at the same time, he's not necessarily the starter on his team. So
And it's
I
only
don't know.
week 1 and you have $100. So you don't want to,
Like
allocate too much, right?
I'm thinking like the max to spend is like 7 on him, but that still feels like too little or maybe too much.
Yeah.
It's really a dilemma that I'm gonna be thinking about today. Like, because I do need a tight end. Because one thing we forgot to mention, Jake Ferguson is hurt for the Cowboys. I don't really know the scenario there. I mean, it looked like he said it's an MCL sprain, but then I saw earlier today that like he's like kind of practicing, so he could be there next week or on Sunday. They play Sunday, right?
Yeah, I
So
think so.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they
I
play
think
Sunday.
I think Thursday night is the Dolphins and the
Bills.
Bills.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So it's possible that he plays, but it's not guaranteed by any means. Trying to think. Justice Hill, who you guys have also mentioned. I have Derrick Henry in the league, but
Yep.
it's definitely a little puzzling. How many times Justice Hill was in the backfield there? He didn't have really any carries, but he got involved in the receiving game, which is big for fantasy football.
Yeah,
So I think
PPR.
that's what?
Said PPR. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
really good. Derrick
absolutely.
Henry just, I don't know. I thought he'd get that involvement, but
Yeah,
no.
Derrick Henry's never been like a pass catcher. He just kind of makes up for it for just
He just trucks
bulldozing
through
over
guys.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah. Well, that pretty much wraps up week 1, highlighting every matchup. A couple waiver wire pickups for you if they're available in your leagues. Thanks so much again for watching. We're going to be back next time to either preview the week 2 games. I'm sure a couple of games on Sunday and Monday. Like Mark just said, got a good Thursday night matchup, which we're going to recap as well at some point with the Bills and the Dolphins. Thank you again so much for watching. If you want to follow us, it helps out the show on YouTube. Subscribe, Blitz Banter Podcast on Instagram, Blitz Banter Pod. Thanks so much for watching.